The banks just smashed the paper price again. You watched a clean move up and then a dump so fast, it looked like the market fell through a trap door. And they want you to swallow the same story they always sell. They want you to believe the rally is over. They want you to believe silver is just a speculative spike that finally popped. They want you staring at the chart, arguing about candles, while something much bigger is happening off screen. They are lying to you. Not a little lie, not a harmless spin. This is a lie of omission, the kind that only works if you stay hypnotized by the ticker. Because while the algorithms were unloading paper contracts into the open, while the talking heads were celebrating a healthy pullback, a resource war tightened its grip on the physical market. And here is the detail that changes everything. Roughly 180 million ounces of silver are effectively trapped. Not destroyed, not consumed, trapped. Locked behind rules, routes, permits, and political red lines that do not care what the spot price says. This is the moment where you have to separate two worlds. There is the paper game and there is the physical game. Paper can be sold in endless size. Physical silver cannot be printed. Physical silver has to be mined, refined, moved, insured, and delivered. And when a meaningful slice of deliverable supply gets pinned in place, price discovery does not just get distorted, it breaks. In this video, I'm going to walk you through what trapped really means, why it is different from a normal shortage, and why the violent pullbacks you are seeing are not proof the story is wrong. They are part of the mechanism. They are how the paper market tries to keep you calm while the physical market gets tighter underneath. So do not blink. This is not a chart story. This is a control story. When most people hear trapped silver, they picture a locked vault, like someone literally put a chain around a warehouse. Sometimes it is that blunt, but usually it is more subtle, and that is why it is so dangerous. Trapped means the metal exists, but it cannot flow to where the price is being set. It cannot show up quickly, in the right form, in the right place, under the right rules, without somebody taking on political and legal risk. Sometimes it is export licensing. Sometimes it is sanctions compliance, where a normal shipment suddenly becomes a liability. Sometimes it is a refining bottleneck, where feedstock piles up in one region while good delivery bars are demanded in another. Sometimes it is a quiet strategic decision, where a government or an industrial buyer simply decides, we need it. That is the first point. Trapped silver is not just a supply issue. It is a permission issue. It is a sovereignty issue. It is a routing issue. And permission problems do not resolve because the price goes up $2. Now, why does that matter for price discovery? Because modern silver pricing is built on an invisible assumption. If the price rises, metal will appear, inventory will be mobilized, leases will expand, bars will move across borders. The system treats physical supply like a sponge you can squeeze. Higher price, more metal, lower price, less metal. But a resource war turns that sponge into stone. Price can rise and the metal still does not move. Price can rise and the inventory still does not relieve the pressure. So the market price you see on your screen stops being the marginal physical transaction. It becomes the marginal paper tactic. And once that gap opens, it tends to widen before it snaps. Here is what that looks like in the real world. A trader sells a wall of contracts, the screen drops, and social media screams, crash. Meanwhile, a manufacturer tries to secure silver for next quarter and gets a very different conversation. We can deliver, but not at that price. We can deliver, but not with those terms. We can deliver, but not that much. The real price shows up as premiums, delays, and quiet rationing, not as a dramatic headline. The loud world is paper. The real world is physical. Trapped inventory widens the gap between them. Now let us talk about the 180 million number, because that scale is the difference between noise and structural damage. Silver is not oil. It is not a market where a few percent does not matter. Silver runs on thin buffers. It is used in tiny amounts across billions of products, but those tiny amounts add up, and much of it gets dispersed and is not easily recovered. Industrial demand is sticky. When a factory needs silver, it does not switch off because the price is uncomfortable. So translate that trap number into a simple question. Where was that metal supposed to go? And who was counting on it being available? This is where the phrase resource war stops being dramatic and starts being literal. A resource war is not always tanks and headlines. Sometimes it is paperwork. Sometimes it is shipping lanes. Sometimes it is insurance. Sometimes it is a compliance department that suddenly says no. It is a world where materials are treated as strategic, and strategic materials get controlled. Silver sits inside multiple strategic supply chains at once: electronics, energy infrastructure, defense systems, medical and chemical processes, even monetary hedging, the human instinct to reach for something real when trust gets shaky. That mix means silver is pulled by forces that do not coordinate with each other. And in a fractured world, those forces become political. So here is the uncomfortable idea. If the flow is controlled, then the price becomes less about discovery and more about outcome. And the paper market is built to manage outcomes. It can manage perception, it can manage sentiment, it can manufacture volatility to teach you the wrong lesson. That is why you see the same pattern. A breakout starts, then a smash. Another breakout starts, then another smash. It is not random. It is behavioral conditioning. The paper market is trying to train you to doubt the move, to hesitate, to sell into strength, to stop asking for the thing itself. Because a real breakout changes behavior. It makes industrial users pull forward buying. It makes inventories draw down faster. It makes people question whether paper claims are as good as metal. And once people question that, leverage becomes dangerous. Now we do the math, but we do it the way the physical market does it. Not with elegant spreadsheets, with simple constraints. How much silver is actually available for delivery, in the forms and places that matter, when it matters? You can quote global mine production. You can quote recycling, you can quote above ground stock, but the choke point is deliverable inventory. The metal that can actually show up and settle obligations without a special excuse. If 180 million ounces are trapped, then for the delivery market, those ounces are effectively removed. They may exist, but they do not function as a buffer. And when buffers shrink, the market becomes hypersensitive. That sensitivity shows up in places the average chart watcher ignores. Lease rates, borrowing costs, premiums, lead times. The difference between available and available for immediate delivery in standard form, those are the whisper signals. They start talking before the headline price does. Let me slow this down and make that trap number feel real, not abstract. Depending on how you count global mine output, 180 million ounces is not a rounding error. It is several months of global flow, the kind of inventory that, in a calm world, would act like a pressure release. When price spikes, it would move. It would smooth shocks. It would keep the system honest. But in a resource war, that cushion does not cushion. It just sits there, and everyone pretends it is still part of the pool. That is how you end up with a market that looks liquid on paper, while the physical side feels like it is running out of oxygen. And this is why price discovery matters. Price discovery is not a slogan. It is the market asking, what is the highest price the marginal buyer will pay for real delivery, and what is the lowest price the marginal seller will accept? If the marginal seller cannot sell because the metal is pinned, the discovery process is missing a leg. Price becomes a one-sided conversation. Now look at what happens to demand when that leg is missing. In a normal market, buyers wait. They assume supply will appear if the price rises. In a stressed market, buyers pull forward. They lock contracts. They build buffers as insurance. The question is no longer how cheap can I get it? The question becomes, can I get it when I need it? This is where fragmentation hides in plain sight. The market starts to split into easy to move and complicated to move. Metal that clears cleanly through compliance, insurance, and standard delivery networks trades like it is scarce. Metal that exists but comes with origin, paperwork, or political friction trades like it is trapped because it is. And now connect that back to the ugly price action you just watched. The paper price is not just a number. It is a lever that changes behavior. When the price breaks out and holds, it invites the real world to act. It invites industrial users to accelerate. It invites more people to ask for the thing itself. That is the moment the paper structure does not want. So the paper market does what it can do. It smashes the screen price to manufacture a feeling. The feeling is, this is normal. This is a failed rally. Go away. That is why, instead of asking why did it drop, ask who needs you to believe the metal is abundant. Because if the metal was truly abundant, you would not need a theatrical performance to prove it. And one more practical point, because this is where most people get shaken out. A broken discovery process rarely announces itself with a single clean move. It shows up as repeated retests. Push up, smack down, push up, smack down. Each retest is the market probing where confidence breaks first. If the physical side is tightening, the floor tends to rise over time, even if the screen tries to deny it. So do not let one ugly day rewrite your whole framework. Watch the structural tells: persistent premiums, persistent tightness, persistent need for intervention. When those tells pile up, you are not watching a normal commodity anymore. You are watching a system trying to keep two prices from becoming obvious. And here's the key. If a market was truly over, it would not need constant intervention. It would fade. It would get boring. It would not require theatrical dumps at predictable moments. The need to manage the narrative is the signal that the system is under stress. Now, the next objection is always the same. Fine, it is tight, but the market will adapt. Higher prices will bring more supply. Recycling will ramp. Substitution will happen, yes, in the long run. But the long run is not what breaks price discovery. The gap between now and the long run is what breaks price discovery. Mining is slow. And remember, silver supply is not a simple on-off switch. A meaningful share of silver arrives as a byproduct of mining other metals. That means silver does not respond to price the way people assume. Even if silver doubles, you cannot instantly double silver output, because many mines are optimized for copper, lead, or zinc, and silver comes along for the ride. Supply reacts on the schedule of geology, permitting, and capital, not on the schedule of a futures chart. That rigidity is exactly what makes trapped inventory so explosive for price discovery. Permitting is slow, building refining capacity is slow, and recycling, the thing people love to treat like a magic faucet, is constrained by collection and process economics. Much of silver is used in tiny amounts spread across devices, panels, electronics, solder, contacts. You do not wave a wand and pull that back into bars next month. So if a resource war pins inventory today, the system cannot rebuild buffers on demand. It takes years. And during those years, the market is still pricing silver as if the world is one integrated pool. But a resource war fractures the pool. It creates friendly and unfriendly trade lanes. It creates metal that is clean to move and metal that is risky to move. It creates regional pricing that does not converge quickly. That is how a single global price becomes a polite fiction. The screen price becomes a headline, and the real price becomes a set of negotiations. And this is where paper leverage becomes the central risk. Futures markets function because most participants roll, net, or settle financially. That works only if delivery is credible. Trust depends on the belief that if someone demands metal, the system can provide it. Trapped inventory attacks that belief. It shrinks the portion of metal that can satisfy delivery in the right form at the right time. The claims can stay large, but the cushion underneath gets thinner. A leveraged system is stable until the day one group stops playing, until someone decides they do not want a paper promise, they want the thing. And in a resource war, that decision can come from people who do not care about optics. Industrial buyers, strategic stockpilers, entities that treat supply as security. Now I want you to notice the psychological game, because it is the part that traps most people. Silver rallies, you get excited. Silver dumps, you feel stupid. You conclude the whole thing is fake. You decide to stop watching. That emotional loop is not an accident. It is the point. The paper market cannot manufacture metal, but it can manufacture doubt. It can manufacture exhaustion. It can make you associate higher prices with pain, so you stop holding long enough for the structure to reset. So instead of asking, why did it drop? Ask, why did they need it to drop right now? If the story was dead, it would not require a shove. And this brings us to the near-term timeline, the practical question. What would force the paper market to acknowledge the physical market? It is usually not one dramatic headline. It is a cluster of signals that turn into an event. Deliverable inventories draw down faster than expected, spreads widen between venues, premiums become persistent instead of temporary, delivery times stretch, a policy change traps more metal or makes routing more expensive overnight. Industrial buyers pull forward demand because they would rather pay up than risk a shortage. When those things align, the move is rarely smooth. It is discontinuous. It can happen over a weekend. It can happen in a gap. It can happen as a sudden repricing that makes yesterday's chart look irrelevant. And when that happens, the response is predictable. Margin changes, rule adjustments, settlement incentives, anything to protect the paper structure from being forced to reconcile with physical reality. That is why I keep calling it a resource war. Because in a resource war, the game is not find the fair price. The game is control the outcome. Now, you might still be thinking, but surely someone will arbitrage trapped metal. Money always finds a way. Sometimes, not always. Arbitrage requires permission. It requires insurance. It requires banking channels. It requires a world where the lowest cost route is allowed to exist. In a fractured world, permission is the scarce commodity. Politics decides which trades are easy and which trades are impossible. So yes, some metal will move, but it will move slower, smaller, and more expensively. That cost becomes the premium. That premium becomes the real price, even if it never shows up cleanly on a headline chart. Now, let us land this. The most important silver story is not a bullish story. It is a trust story. Do you trust that the price you see is the price you can actually source metal at, in size, when you need it? If the answer is no, then the screen price is not price discovery. It is a narrative tool. And once enough real users of silver decide the screen is a narrative, they stop optimizing around it. They secure supply directly, they build buffers, they accept premiums, they reshape the market quietly, then one day the public price catches up in a violent way. So when you hear 180 million ounces trapped, do not treat it like a fun statistic. Treat it like a warning that the shock absorber has been pulled out of the system. Pullbacks do not disprove that. They often confirm it, because the more fragile the structure, the more it needs to manage your behavior. In a resource war, paper rules can be changed. Supply chains cannot be negotiated with. And if that much metal is pinned, the silver that is free is about to find out what its price really is.